Chapter 11. Rumors. 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The topic was changed so abruptly that Yen Cheng was caught off guard. Who says I don't go out to socialize? In defense, he said. I simply leave later than you and arrive home earlier than you. It was impossible to refute this. Chen Jinyao was speechless. Night falls early during winter. Outside the windows, one could see the colorful lights of the city. Yen Cheng frowned. He drew in a breath and asked. Hey, where did you hear that? You know of it. Chen Jinyao wasn't surprised. Yes, you should know. There were a few prominent families in the imperial capital. Chen Jinyao completely left her social circle after marrying Yen Cheng, but that wasn't the case for Yen Cheng. Chen Jinyao pondered for a moment and asked. So, what do you think? Just live your life well, why care about what others say? Men and women have differing opinions. Even if a man was able to guess the truth of the matter, he will think that such gossip is trivial, believing there's no need to trace the root of the issue. However, women are different, they care about the issue and are willing to solve it. And Chen Jinyao happens to be someone who pays attention to these trivial gossip. Am I a tigress? Yen Cheng lazily looked up and shook his head. Then calling me a tigress is slandering my reputation. That sounds reasonable. He listened more intently. Chen Jinyao. So. I'll listen to you, Yen Cheng replied with narrowed eyes. Chen Jinyao was satisfied with this answer, but she had to remind him of one more thing. Yen Cheng, you may know Huaqidong, but you certainly don't know women. There are women who would rather die than to live in humiliation, for instance, someone like Zhou Shui. Who knows, perhaps Zhou Shui intends to drag her down to hell. Chen Jinyao certainly won't do anything foolish for love. She even regretted marrying Yen Cheng. Since Yen Cheng wasn't in his right mind either, he must have committed more than a basketful of stupid mistakes. And she, as his ally and wife since their marriage contract, had to wipe his *** whenever he makes a mistake. The most terrible part is that Yen Cheng himself was still quite smart despite his shortcomings. Or perhaps, he's just a fool who eats, drinks and plays around. Chen Jinyao sighed. She suddenly rose and stood in front of Yen Cheng, then rested one knee on the sofa as she gazed down at Yen Cheng condescendingly. Yen Cheng unconsciously reached out and hooked her waist. He raised a brow and willfully pulled the woman into his arms, causing Chen Jinyao to sit on his thighs. The distance between them shortened more and more until they were eye to eye. There was a quiet tension in the air. If they continue this quiet action and allow the mood to drive them, perhaps they will act on impulse at any moment and provoke danger. Didn't you say you would introduce me to your friends last time? Chen Jinyao asked. The ambiguity dispersed in a moment. Yen Cheng licked his lips. Unfortunately, while his Adam's apple rolled twice, he could only hold it in as he replied with a low, how many friends? Only 2 or 3. He had many friends and acquaintances whom he shared wine and meals with, but in fact, only a certain few knew him intimately. Chen Jinyao nodded and touched Yen Cheng's face with one hand. That's all right. Invite them over for dinner this Sunday. Their pair of eyes were so close that the tips of their noses almost touched. I need someone to spread the word, she said. Yen Cheng's lips curved upwards as he raised a brow. Chen Jinyao chuckled. For example, Chen Jinyao, who takes care of the young master, is actually a very good wife and mother. And to add to that, in fact, you are willing to surrender to my skirt and accompany me till our hairs turn gray, just like the ideal husband and wife. She tilted her head and smiled deeper. I can't bear all of these false charges alone. Chapter 12. Guests. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was finally sunny in the imperial capital. By Saturday, the early snow had gradually melted and the sunshine outside the window was bright and beautiful. Dunny wagged his tail, sitting on the living room sofa as he rested for a bit. Chen Jingyao was startled awake by Yan Cheng's inappropriate actions. She opened her drowsy eyes and stayed stunned for a moment. In the blink of an eye, she rolled over and got on top of Yan Cheng. After a while, she slowly sat up with her hands pressing against his chest. She sat on his lower abdomen without a care, their bodies touching each other, separated by two pieces of cloth that was gently rubbing one another. It was too much early in the morning. Yan Cheng narrowed his eyes and sucked in a cold breath, his breath slightly hitching a bit. At the same time that he was stirred by her actions, he couldn't help but clench his teeth and think silently. She really knows how to tease me. Go settle that by yourself in the bathroom. Chen Jingyao was mostly awake and knew he could take care of that by himself. Therefore, she lazily yawned and then reached over to pat Yan Cheng's face. No matter how energetic you are, don't rub around like a dog in heat. After that, she got out of bed to wash up without even looking back. Yan Cheng rolled around in bed for a bit carrying the blanket, looking desperate like a husband whose needs weren't fulfilled. He sighed heavily, this is a really sullen marriage. They had settled their marriage in one go. They got into their roles, husband and wife. They did their parts and tried their best to make this new family as perfect and harmonious as possible. Compared to marrying because of love, the two married so that they could become partners and live together. They signed their respective contracts. As to what would happen in the end, it depended on themselves. It was going quite well and gradually getting on the right track. They needed to make progress with the intimate things that couples do slowly. Yan Cheng understood this, but he was at the age where his hormones got the best of him, especially in the morning. No matter how pure her thoughts and actions were, it couldn't withstand his instinctive reaction. Therefore, I said to sleep in separate rooms. Chen Jingyao just finished brushing her teeth and washing her face. She peered out of the bathroom in the middle of putting on lotion. If this continues, that'll become useless one day. Yan Cheng gave her a look as if, you know too, huh? When you were arrested and said that you were whoring around, I almost believed you. Yan Cheng shoved his head under the pillow and said, oh, I almost believed it too. Only after all, to them, the honeymoon was just the two of them going out touring. It was very pure and innocent. It was bland and very harmonious. Dunny sitting in the living room seemed to have heard movements within the room. After he jumped off the sofa, he immediately dashed to the bedroom door and whimpered. When the male owner was home, he didn't get to sleep on the bed anymore. More or less, he felt wronged. Chen Jingyao walked over and opened the door. The moment Dunny saw a crack, he wiggled in. After cuddling with her for a while, he dashed straight for the bed. Seeing how he barely had any conscience, she couldn't help but glare at Yan Cheng. Hurry and get out of bed. After you're done eating, we're going to the supermarket. Why are we going to the supermarket? Yan Cheng supported himself up and casually petted the cat. We're obviously going to purchase ingredients to be used tomorrow. Chen Jingyao acted as if he was stupid. She went to the closet to look for clothes to wear for today and then walked back to the bathroom happily. Before stepping in, she knitted her brows and asked, did you notify all of your friends already? This matter implicated Chen Jinyao's so-called childish counterattack. Yan Cheng naturally didn't dare to forget about this. He reached over to pat down his messy hair and nodded, yeah. Chapter 13. Guests, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. However, he didn't understand where she got the courage from to say that she'd display her cooking capabilities in the kitchen when she was the type of person to even eat out for breakfast. This was very unfair. It could be said to be considerably unfair. Normally, the couple bought takeout for their meals. To speak the truth, Yan Cheng usually never saw Chen Jingyao cook at home before. However, her first time cooking was for his friends. It made it seem like he needed to thank his friends for that. point was Chen Jinhao was showing off in front of him and telling him not to underestimate her, saying that she wasn't bragging. If she didn't go to become a dentist, she would be able to get a job at a 5-star hotel. In the end, she even said that she was able to cook a sumptuous and delicious banquet. The more he heard about it, the more angry he became. Yan Cheng looked up, thinking that he was wronged. Therefore, he reported his situation to his team, unable to let this go. His team said, "You've been staying at home all these days and haven't cooked before. Meanwhile, I have a job. In the end, it's you, who hasn't done your job properly." The blame was shifted on him. He had no choice but to shut his mouth obediently. Even so, when he invited Xiao Chongxi and the others, he still gave Chen Jinhao enough face. The sun in winter was extraordinarily gentle. It wasn't glaring wherever it shone. It was just quietly, exhibiting its effect. It was just a beautiful and eye-catching accessory. The weather was good today, and it was coincidentally Sunday. There were a lot of people in the supermarket. Yan Qing rarely went to the supermarket. He had been dragged by Chen Jinhao to the supermarket once after they got married and moved into a new home in order to get some daily essential items. Afterwards, this was the only other time. It was a rare experience, but surprisingly, it felt pretty nice. However, this feeling only maintained for half an hour. He was quite lazy and he slowly followed behind Chen Jinhao pushing the shopping cart. However, no matter how slow he was, his speed couldn't be compared to Chen Jinyao's turtle-like speed in which she chose vegetables and fruits. She went back and forth, comparing the different items. If he didn't urge her from time to time, she could have started sprouting. "You can just casually buy some things, cooked food is fine too." Yan Qing slightly narrowed his eyes, his prince-like attitude revealing his impatience. "You just need to give them something to eat." Chen Jinhao half-heartedly hummed, but she didn't speed up either. Just from her attitude, she was being too excessive. Only after staying silent for a while, Chen Jinhao seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly lifted her head and looked at Yan Cheng, pushing his arm while he was at it. "Go line up first." "I refuse." Yan Cheng rejected her without even thinking. The man's voice was hoarse mixed with a tint of laziness. However, the reason for rejection made one laugh. He said, "A family should be together." What use was it to be together? They still had to experience such a long wait on the line to check out, no. Yan Qing bent down, half his body leaning against the shopping cart. He looked down and even his eyelashes were drooping lazily. He seemed like he admitted defeat and had nothing to live for. He was handsome and his every move attracted the girl's attention, especially when he took out his cigarette from his pocket. When he slowly put it to his mouth, the girls started jumping excitedly. They all looked around and didn't bother to hide their whispers. He played with the lighter in between his fingers. After a few seconds, he stopped but he didn't light up his cig. Yan Qing slightly raised his eyes and his gaze was fixated on the shelf behind Chen Jinhao. There seemed to be a flicker of a smile in his pitch black eyes. He licked his lips and after consideration, he grabbed a few boxes of that item into the shopping cart, twice. He didn't even act uncomfortable doing that in public. Chapter 14. Guests, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. The girls stopped whispering to one another, probably finding it awkward. They looked at Yan Qing with red faces for a while before their gazes stopped at Chen Jinhao. In the end, they pushed one another ahead to pay the bill. Chen Jinhao shifted her face and bit her lips. After a while, she couldn't hold it in. At the same time that she turned around to look at him, she elbowed his waist. She narrowed her eyes unfriendly. "Why did you take that?" Even more, she flew into a rage out of humiliation, stomping her feet. Yan Cheng's gaze was calm. He then said faintly, "Just in case." Around 10 a.m. the next day. Xiao Chongxi, Chai Yu, and Atai arrived at their home in time. Naturally, as guests, they didn't forget to bring gifts. Yanqing opened the door for them. The moment he did, the three outside the door were stunned. They felt as if something inside their hearts was ruined. Their young master that usually fooled and played around actually wore a cartoon-style blue apron. The other hand that wasn't holding the door was holding a sharp and reflective kitchen knife that still had green chopped onion bits on it. The situation was awkward. Chai Yu reacted first and lifted his brows. "You want to butcher us?" "Yep." Yanqing lazily leaned to the side and let them in. He didn't deny it either. He gritted his teeth. "I do want to butcher you guys." Chen Jinyao popped her head out from the kitchen, peeling garlic in her hands. After greeting the three, she naturally said, "Hubby, pour tea for the guests." The moment he said this, before Yan Cheng's expression could turn dark, Atai jumped out as if someone had stepped on his tail. "It's fine, sister.in.law. We're not thirsty." Just thinking about letting their boss pour tea for them made them frightened. Yan Cheng was very pleased with Atai's attitude. He had them sit in the living room before his cold gaze faintly landed on his two other friends. Chai Yu immediately sat still and said, "No need for the trouble. I can pour it myself." "Me too." Xiao Chongxi slowly expressed his position too. Yan Cheng was completely comforted by then. He was willing to cooperate with Chen Jinyao to act like a couple, thus the reason why he tied an apron around his waist. This was also why he returned to the kitchen to help Chen Jinyao after settling his friends down. Their living room and kitchen were in the same space. 2/3 of the space was the kitchen, and the rest belonged to the kitchen. One could see what happened in the kitchen looking from the living room. Therefore, the three were much more shocked than they were when they just entered to see Yanqing standing by Chen Jinyao's side and helping her slowly cut the vegetables up. The vegetables on the cutting board were unbearable to the eyes. Chen Jinyao didn't want to look at it the second time. The effect was achieved. There was no point to act anymore. She shifted her legs and tapped Yan Cheng's lower leg. Yan Cheng slightly bent down and asked, "Go out and be with your friends. It's not like you can help me. When the dishes are cooked, I'll call you then." Chen Jinyao lowered her voice. Yan Cheng snorted and asked, "You're breaking the bridge now that you've crossed it." "Only, breaking it my ass." Chen Jinyao laughed and exclaimed, "Right, bring the washed and cut fruits outside." She shifted her gaze and looked over, raising her chin to indicate. At this time, in the three strangers' eyes, they thought that the couple was bantering flirtatiously. Shock wasn't enough to describe the three. At this time, they acted as if they've seen a ghost. How was this possible? Xiao Chongxi slightly narrowed his eyes and sat leisurely, leaning against the sofa arm the entire time. With one hand supporting his chin, he glanced at the situation in the kitchen. Not long later, a smile floated on his lips. Although he just received the information, he was still considering whether or not to tell Yanqing about this. TCH, didn't Chen Jinyao like Huaqidong? Chapter 15. Are you blind? 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Indeed, it was still a bit early for the meal to be served. They had to blame themselves for getting up late. Even though they were bustling around, they hadn't even cooked the first dish yet. After glancing at the two figures working around in the kitchen, it gave off the feeling as if they were an old married couple. They worked together harmoniously and there was a faint warm atmosphere. With his elbow resting on his knee, Chai Yu slightly bent over and his gaze transcended Xiao Chongxi's. He took out his phone and directly took a picture. This Chen Jinyao really has some methods. Better than Zhou Shui. Atai had always been straightforward, but even so, he hadn't gotten the crucial point. He had always expressed his dislike for Zhou Shui. Chai Yu edited, "This isn't the Yanqing I know," onto the photo and uploaded to his friend's circle. Then he looked up again and said half-jokingly, you're still young and you don't understand. If we were to say who is more exciting, that'd be Zhou Shui. After that, he got up and walked to the window. Pots of plants were arranged on the window, green scenery everywhere. The plants were exuberant. He stopped touching his pocket and his desire to smoke faded. He turned around and looked towards the room as if like a statue. He seemed to know how Qin Jingyao caught Yan Cheng's heart. Although she was a bit reasonable, this house did feel like a warm home. Yan Cheng was still in the kitchen causing trouble. Bring the tray of fruits outside, do you hear me? Qin Jingyao glared at him, not wanting to give him face at all. Finally, she couldn't hold it in any more and pushed him a few times firmly before preparing to cook. You're seriously in my way. She had emphasized once again. The first time was 15 minutes ago. Yan Qing gritted his teeth and agilely moved to the side, so Qin Jingyao didn't get to push him. He glanced outside from the corner of his eyes to see the three guests' passionate gazes on them. After making eye contact for several seconds, the three quickly looked down and glanced at the ceiling. Clearly, Qin Jingyao had achieved the effect she wanted. I think we need to act out fully. Yan Qing pursed his lips. His sudden words made Qin Jingyao stunned as expected. After she decorated the dish with onion bits, she slightly tilted her head and looked up. In the next second, Yan Qing leaned over and moved closer to her. His lips touched her soft face. Unavoidably, the tip of his nose also touched her face as he took in the faint milky fragrance on her. Regrettably, he felt a numb feeling the moment he just parted from her. Yan Qing slightly narrowed his eyes, the light inside dimming. He hadn't had enough. Okay. He pretended to act calm as he said this. Then, he met Qin Jinyao's unfriendly gaze awkwardly for a few seconds before quickly escaping the crime of the scene with the tray of fruits. If in the beginning, they thought they had seen a ghost, then she was really an evildoer that was in everyone's childhood nightmares. How long has it been? If he just shifted his feelings for her after claiming that he'd not marry anyone but her, from an objective perspective, he was a bit of a scumbag. Chai Yu replied to a comment in his friend's circle. He compared the comments to what the others had asked to what he had responded with, and then thought of the rumors revolving around Yan Cheng and Qin Jingyao a few days ago. A few seconds later, his mouth widened and he slapped his head, coming to a realization. So it seems like although they were inviting them over to eat, they were actually using them. He swallowed his saliva before walking back to the coffee table slowly. He bent over and picked up a few dates and said, Yan Cheng, you have great acting skills. Only without even looking up, Yan Cheng asked, what? Acting lovely and dovey. Chai Yu was proud, thinking that he had come up with the truth due to his own intelligence. He clicked into WeChat and then scrolled to the status he just made. Then he delivered it to Yan Cheng. You and Qin Jingyao acted out the roles of a happy couple in front of us, so that you can achieve your goal. No. You're quite childish. Atai's gaze shifted between the two of them, and he was confused. Xiao Chongxi placed one leg over the other, leaning to the side charmingly to quietly watch the situation. Yan Cheng said nothing either. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Chai Yu with an unknown expression. Up until Chai Yu ended up questioning life. He knitted his brows and exclaimed, isn't that so? It was impossible. He reached over and scratched his hair. Half. Yan Cheng lazily looked up and crossed his hands to support his chin. That is indeed my motive. Chapter 16. Are you blind? 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Halfway through his words, Chai Yu eagerly revealed an expression as if, look, that's what I said. In the next second over, his expression crumbled. Yan Qing said shamelessly, as for acting lovey-dovey, we have been a couple from the start. The sunlight on Sunday was much stronger than it was on Saturday. It contained a suitable amount of warmth, penetrating through the window and sprinkling on the not so quiet living room. The faint wooden floor seemed to be dyed into another color in the living room too. In the end, the guests had a satisfied meal. Chen Jinhao really didn't boast her cooking skills. There was a whole table of delicious food. After they tasted it, they all gave good ratings for it. To this, Chen Jinhao acted humble on the surface, but it was hard to hide the tugging of her lips. On the dining table, Atai carefully observed Chen Jinhao, seemingly wanting to see something from her face. Chen Jinhao was quite open and even allowed him to size her up and down. Compared to Atai, Chai Yu was a bit more direct. He seemed to want to verify that they were a loving couple. Therefore, he kept on asking some useless questions. After receiving flawless answers, he started complimenting Chen Jinhao, saying that they were a wonderful couple and whatnot. Meanwhile, he looked at Yan Cheng, wanting to see if he had reacted in any way. In the end, Chen Jinhao felt extremely pampered by the compliments. As for Yan Cheng, he curled his lips up charmingly as if to say, "You have great taste." Chai Yu was too shocked and frightened by this. Especially when Yan Cheng patiently and carefully picked out the fish bones for Chen Jinhao. He really widened his eyes and sucked in a cold breath. This tyrant Yan actually helped someone pick out the fish bones. Was he really possessed by an evildoer? He probably believed by now that he wasn't joking around. But he still didn't understand a lot of things. Of course, they knew that even if they had questions, they couldn't just ask them in front of his wife. Not to mention, this was their private matter. There was really no need to probe and get to the bottom of this. Don't mention how shocked the guests were, but even Chen Jinhao was unable to accept this. Underneath the table, she lightly kicked him. At the same time, she moved to his ears and whispered, "You were too excessive." Really? He didn't think so as he lifted his brows. Chen Jinhao replied, "Yes. If you continue on, it'd seem too obvious. Just keep it as it is. You're overthinking. They'll think that we're just acting if we don't do anything more." Yan Cheng lifted his brows and smiled. "When I carried the tray of fruits out, Chai Yu suspected me. Thankfully, I saved the situation." She knitted her brows and stared at him questioningly. There was music in the living room, and because the two of them lowered their voices purposely while chatting, it felt like they were just breathing into each other's ear gently. The passers-by couldn't hear what exactly they were mumbling about. Although they couldn't hear it, they could see it. They could see that the couple was being intimate and close with one another. Xiao Chongxi narrowed his eyes when he saw this. Clearly, the observing glint in his eyes became richer and deeper. He picked up the pull-top can by his right and then gulped the can of beer moodily in the end. Only after that, he looked up and locked his gaze on Chen Jinhao expressionlessly. Chen Jinhao had pursued Hua Qidong in the past, in a large-scale manner at that. However, because that had happened a long time ago, people gradually buried that memory deep inside their minds. If they didn't actively seek out the memory, they would never remember this. Xiao Chongxi had heard about this when he went to play around in the club. From a strict perspective, Chen Jinhao, Hua Qidong, and Zhou Shui's ties go deeper than Yan Cheng, Hua Qidong, and Zhou Shui. He only got a general understanding of it. After all, back then, Chen Jinhao pursued Hua Qidong just as much as Yan Cheng trying to please Zhou Shui. Later on, he heard that Chen Jinhao had done something to Zhou Shui, leading Hua Qidong to place their relationship to the side and curse her out. The scolding probably hurt Chen Jinyao's heart. After that, she stopped appearing by Hua Qidong's side every day. Even more, she started hiding from him. It was heard that after the college entrance exams, she was originally going to the same university as Hua Qidong, changed her mind last minute and chose an university in another city, deciding to learn medicine. Since high school, Chen Jinhao was known as the bad girl and a young miss that bullied the weak because she came from a powerful and wealthy family. Even if they went to look through her university's forums, they could still find some news on that. Chapter 17. Are you blind? 17. you are listening at novelfull.audio. However, men and women were the same. Towards their first love, there was a certain feeling for them that no one could replace. They could bury it deep inside, but the moment it was exposed, it would be glaring and shocking to the heart. The music in their ears suddenly changed style. It stopped being soft and instead, became rhythmic and uplifting. It was quite exciting to the heart. Xiao Chongxi snapped out of his trance and secretly withdrew his gaze. The Qin Jinyao in front of his eyes was completely different from the so-called arrogant and overbearing Qin Jinyao in high school. It could be said that they were two different people. At least right now, when Qin Jinyao was mentioned, people all said that she was gentle and quiet. Besides the so-called rumors and unpleasant talks in high school, those that had interacted with Qin Jinyao after all had pretty good impressions of her. He ate until he was mostly full before placing her chopsticks down. Xiao Chongxi made a brave assumption. Maybe someone was purposely trying to taint Qin Jinyao's reputation. Sister.in.law, I heard that you grew up with Huaqidong. He thought about it before joining the conversation, half smiling. He was clearly stirring up trouble. Everyone knew that Yan Cheng and Huaqidong were completely incompatible, like enemies. Everyone stopped talking as a result and the atmosphere became tense. Chai Yu slapped Xiao Chongxi's back and then laughed dryly, giving him a look as if, you really dare to say this. Why must he mention that person? Surprisingly, Yan Cheng's expression was normal. Even more, he responded before Qin Jinyao could say anything. He narrowed his eyes and asked lazily, you still want to hear about it? Fine. It seemed like only he was curious and meddling in other people's businesses. After seeing the guests over, it became quiet all of a sudden. Yan Qing hugged Qin Jinyao and laid on the sofa, dispirited and without energy. The moment he saw how much of a mess there was on the dining table, his expression became lifeless. He slightly narrowed his eyes and gritted, what do we do about this? Wash them. Qin Jinyao stared at him strangely as if looking at him in disdain for asking such a stupid question. Hearing this, Yan Qing hissed in pain. He pushed Qin Jinyao to the side and looked carefully at her. He was alarmed. Who's washing them? You. Silence. Endless silence. Clearly, young Master Yan rejected this since he had never done such a thing. I can't. He was very honest. I cooked the table of food. Qin Jinyao was also very determined. Though being persistent, she didn't forget to find a comfortable spot in his arms. Ah, I'm so tired. Yan Qing stayed silent, accepting her effort to act cute. But he still struggled one last time. Why don't we throw it all away? Qin Jinyao ended up closing her eyes, too lazy to answer. Little thing, go wash it. He kicked Dunny by the side. Dunny got up and found a safer spot before continuing to nap. No one was willing to mention this topic anymore. But the result was still the same. He couldn't avoid it and he still had to face reality. Why don't we buy a dishwasher? This was reliable. Yan Qing lifted his brows and said, that works. He paused before emphasizing, why don't we order it now and find a store that could deliver it by tonight? There's something wrong with you. Winter sunshine quickly came. With its orangish-yellow warm sunlight, everything became beautiful and scenic. Yan Cheng was forced to wash the dishes and then Qin Jinyao also took a picture of him as a result. She took a picture from every angle, and got enough for 9 frames. Her gaze softened. She didn't add any captions, smiling as she uploaded this to her friend's circle. Look, I ruined your reputation. There were some bubbles on the right side of Yan Cheng's face. Hearing this, he glanced at her faintly and said calmly, just wait. I'll have you pay the price. After they fooled around enough, it was time to get back on the right track. After Xiao Chongxi brought up Huaqidong, to speak the truth, Qin Jinyao still hadn't forgotten about him. It wasn't because of him, but rather she hadn't told Yan Qing the truth about something. It had been weighing her down. Only although it was no big deal, a woman's sixth sense told her that this was going to be problematic in the future. Although she hadn't done anything guilty, she still needed to let him know. She hesitated for a moment before blinking her eyes. "Hey, I want to talk to you about something. It's about Huachidong." She licked her lips and exposed, "I was ignorant back then. I had a crush and pursued him." The atmosphere started to become strange. Yan Qing paused and then looked at her. After processing what she just said, he knitted his brows and slowly looked up. He felt an unknown emotion rising in his heart. Then, he said indifferently and coldly, "Oh, please don't try to conceal the fact that you were blind by saying that you were young and ignorant." Chen Jinyao was speechless. Chapter 18. Do you still like him? 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Married couples had to be frank with each other and communicate with patience. This was the essence to this particular life lesson. If they were able to say this without hesitation, then it was no big deal. Yan Qing understood this, but he was still unhappy. Especially when he was resting at home and had nothing to do, it was more likely for him to spend his efforts thinking about random things. After a few days, his emotions slowly reached a tipping point and exploded. There were only 2 orangish-yellow lamps turned on in the dim bedroom. However, the light in the bathroom was bright. The strong and glaring light brightened half the space. Through the door, there was whooshing water sounds mixed with Chen Jinyao's vague but happy singing voice. Yan Qing heard Chen Jinyao's singing and thought even more that she had no conscience. He leaned lazily by the headboard, trying to suppress his anger. He stared at the bathroom door and grinded his teeth. After a while, his gaze suddenly softened. Chen Jinyao enjoyed sleeping Yan Cheng's arms. The reason was simple. It was too cold when one just climbed in bed in the winter. However, Yan Cheng was warm and hugging him was like hugging a large-scale warm teddy bear. After she hugged him for a while, her stiff and cold limbs recovered its consciousness. Even more, it made it easier for her to fall asleep. Tonight, like always, after taking a shower and drying herself, she changed into her PJs. She wore her slippers as she made puddles of water by the bathroom door. Not long later, she started walking out and climbing into bed slowly. The warm bath had washed away her tiredness. After she laid in bed, she let out a comfortable sigh. Moments later, she moved to her right, moving closer to the source of warmth. While moving halfway, Chen Jinyao suddenly felt an external force around her waist. She looked up at Yan Qing. Just as she was confused and stunned, he pushed her towards the left. Yan Qing glanced coldly at her blank and incredulous look. He lifted his brows and exclaimed, "Sleep on your side. Stop sticking onto me like glue. I pampered you too much." His tone was indifferent and stiff. He looked at her expressionlessly. But at this moment, his image as a considerate good husband has completely collapsed. They glanced at each other for a few minutes stiffly. Chen Jinyao suppressed the surprise in her eyes. "I'm the one earning money in the family. I'm advising you to not treat me like this." The man pursed his lips and said nothing, but his expression was still gloomy. "I'm giving you another chance to take back your words." She narrowed her eyes. He lazily curled his lips up and stayed silent, deciding to be stubborn until the end. Outside the window, Dunny purred unhappily, not wanting to be left alone. He successfully attracted Chen Jinyao's attention. The latter thought about it. Dunny was also a small furnace. She didn't need to concede to Yan Qing. Although she didn't know why he suddenly rejected her, since he did, she had no choice but to back up and settle for the next best thing. She climbed up from the bed and slipped her feet into the slippers, preparing to go out and carry Dunny inside. "Only, what are you doing?" Yan Qing finally couldn't hold it in anymore. Chen Jinyao glanced at him and gritted, "You won't let me hug you, so I'll go hug Dunny." This was a blatant threat. The two made eye contact for a good 20 seconds. Right after, just as Chen Jinniao was about to get out of bed, Yan Qing suddenly got up and threw himself at the edge of the bed, grabbing Chen Jinniao quickly. He reached over and grabbed her arm, applying some strength and throwing her back in bed. She was surprised by his sudden action. Ah! Chen Jinniao subconsciously started screaming, but stopped when Yan Qing pressed himself on top of her. Hug, hug, hug. I'll let you hug me. Yan Qing seemed to be flustered and exasperated. After analyzing his tone, he was more annoyed and vexed rather than flustered and exasperated. He was annoyed because he was the only one that was moody, causing the situation to fold out like this. Chapter 19. Do you still like him? 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He grabbed Chen Jinniao's slender waist in one hand, bringing her to his arms. He pressed against her, the two bodies glued together. They glanced at each other and they could feel each other's breaths on one another. Not long later, Chen Jinniao snapped out of her trance and became awake. She reached over to push the man beside her but failed. The warm breath blew in her ears, tickling and numbing her. Before she could knit her brows, she heard a lazy but magnetic chuckle. She was confused. Right after, Yan Qing revealed a smile. He raised his hand and pulled the blankets over the two of them, easily locking the two in a tight and narrow space. Everything then turned to darkness for her. Dunyi probably gave up, so he stopped purring. The surroundings became silent. Her heart was thumping loudly like the roaring of thunder. The temperature started to increase, and she felt heated up. Yan Qing looked down, his breath sprinkling on Chen Jinniao's neck, and the latter subconsciously shrunk back. She clenched. Yan Qing, let go of me. Before she could finish, he gently bit her neck, licking it. It was clear what he was hinting. Chen Jinniao froze, not even daring to move. She was scared that she might have activated some sort of power switch if she moved. But truth proved that even if she didn't move, the power switch was half on. She swallowed her saliva and twisted around, struggling to get up. However, Yan Qing acted as if he didn't hear. After a long while, he stopped, his breathing slow. He called her name, Chen Jinniao. His palm gently rubbing her smooth and delicate back. By the time he forced himself up and let the two keep some distance away, he continued, I am an ordinary man with desires. His hoarse voice was mixed with a bit of sexiness. After a while, he continued to say slowly, purposely dragging his voice, if it weren't that I was letting you, I would have ked you the first time you wrapped your arms around me like an octopus while sleeping. Hearing this, Chen Jinniao widened her eyes in fright. Yan Qing didn't lie. This was indeed one of the reasons why he rejected Chen Jinniao's hugs. In the future, be careful when you're hugging me. He was young and vigorous. Even more, Chen Jinniao was beautiful and had a good figure too, and also his legal wife. It was one thing to sleep on the same bed, but when she rubbed herself against him without even realizing, he couldn't help but get thoughts. He really wanted to retort when Chen Jinniao claimed that he was being a pervert in the mornings. He wanted to say that she was the one that seduced him first. It's not just because of this, right? Chen Jinniao snapped out of her trance and cleared her throat. With a woman's sixth sense, she pondered over this before asking. If it was just this simple reason, he would have pushed her away the first day that she hugged him. Plus, which man would act like such a gentleman in front of a woman? She even got in his bed. How dumb was he to act noble and virtuous, rejecting her? Only therefore, there must be an external reason as to why she was rejected. Tell me. Yan Qing rolled over and laid to the side, unnaturally pursing his lips. After a while, he looked at her and tugged his hair in irritation. You said that you had a crush on Huachidong a few days ago. How about now? What now? She didn't understand his words. Do you still like him now? He was a bit hesitant. He was scared that he'd confirm the rumors. That the person he liked married someone else, so he found someone to marry under a whim of discouragement. If that was really the case, even if he added all those agreements, it was the same as having none. No matter what, it was still objectionable to him. Chen Jingyao pursed her lips and almost laughed out loud. With him hovering over her, she could easily shift and lie on her side. She looked at him and poked his chin with her fingertip. Then, in a proper manner, I had long stopped liking him. Chapter 20. Do you still like him? 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. But my parents think that I love him to the point where I am suffocating. Yan Qing grabbed her hands and pinched it. Really, I had stopped contacting him a long time ago. I swear, she smiled. If I really like him, then let me be struck by lightning. Yan Qing was slightly frozen. He looked at her for a while before raising his brows. He was silent for a moment. He was delighted. You don't need to make such a poisonous oath. It's not like I doubted you. Heh. Chen Jinyao rolled the blankets over to the corner of the bed. The large scale teddy bear was on the verge of courting disaster. No matter how attractive his warmth was, he was abandoned in the end. As for the reform for the tea house, they actually didn't need to spend so much effort on it. Yan Qing meant that they just needed to recover to the business model they previously had before Zhou Chao started managing it. After all, if they kept on altering it, it'd probably be transformed into a quiet and peaceful tea house. The tea house wasn't a place that young people enjoyed going anymore. No matter what, he still needed to earn money and do business. It didn't even need half a month to recover the tea house to its original style. The police station just gave that deadline, that they'd finish fixing it within the limit. Then, they'd be able to continue and do business. After all, Yan Qing belonged to the Yan family. The police knew about his status and would give him some face. Atai moved quickly, more so that he didn't like to be idle. After he was pretty much done, he gave a call to Yan Qing right away. He asked him if the tea house could be reopened. Right now, Yan Qing was preparing to go to Chen Jinyao's clinic. He wanted to see her and at the same time, have lunch together so that they could improve their relationship. When he heard Atai asking him, he didn't wear any expression. That quick. The longer it drags on, the more customers we lose. Atai knitted his brows and reported, a month has passed already. It's not considered quick. The original Air Tea House's employees are still waiting to continue to work so that they could get paid. Yan Qing sorted out his tie and lifted his eyes. Haven't I still been paying them while business is closed? Yes, so they feel bad. Atai said. It had been sunny for a consecutive week. There was sunshine everywhere and it was bright, brushing away the cold and bringing warmness. But no matter how bright the sun was, it couldn't withstand the cold wind. Air Tea House seemed to be responding to this good weather, being able to reopen again. Yan Qing had been resting at home for a long time. Especially after they stopped ordering takeouts, and started cooking at home, he gradually realized that he had gained some weight. The specific time for the tea house to open was pushed to next week by him. During this time, he made Atai in complete charge. He was a capable person and also his good friend. Yan Qing was very comforted by him. Right, where's Zhou Chao? Atai hesitated before saying, he's working in Huaqidong's company. Oh. Yan Qing looked down and bent over to change his shoes. He paused before clicking his tongue, snorting, he is really open-minded. Only Atai also laughed along, ending up telling him about all of the gossip he had heard recently. I heard from Brother Xiao that because of Zhou Chao, Huaqidong and Zhou Shui had fought. Huaqidong had been staying at the residence lately and he doesn't even go home now. Zhou Shui complained tearfully to her friends about it but ended up being the laughingstock of the circle. He carefully said the second half of the sentence. If it weren't that they were in a call, he might have been able to observe his expression. But right now, Yen Cheng wasn't interested in this. He didn't have that much patience to hear about the others. He half-heartedly claimed that he was busy, saying, "You can deal with their teahouse's matter as you see fit, and I'm driving now." Then he hung up decisively. Atai was speechless. To speak the truth, he felt like he didn't know his boss anymore.